Welcome to the Disability and podcast, bringing together thoughtful discussion and debate. This month, Mind the Gap's associate producer Paul Wilshaw chats with artist and activist James Leadbitter, a.k.a. the vacuum cleaner, about his work around the topic of mental health, his work abroad, and how the arts help support people's mental health. This podcast contains some strong language.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Disability and podcast. Today I am interviewing the great James Leadbitter. Today we will be talking around the topic around mental health. So if you find that topic is going to be hard for you, please turn off now because we want everyone's mental health to be in a safe space. We care about our audiences. James, thanks so much for coming on today. So, on your website, it says that you make candid, provocative and playful work. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started?
Firstly, just thanks for having me on and shout out to Mind the Gap. A lot of love for you guys. Provocative, playful and candid. I think that's my approach to mental health, basically. Provocative because I think it's not contentious to say that mental health care as a system, not the individuals within it, but the system has always failed people. We have to be willing to be really explicit in calling that out and challenging that failure, and that, you know, sometimes we have to be provocative about that, because that's a fight for justice, like all disability justice movements. We can't be shy about that. Playful because I think being disabled, and I think particularly around mental health, it can be really hard and it literally can be depressing, right? So I think that the playfulness is really important. But I also think that I know a lot of my CRIP friends, my disabled friends, we like being funny about our disability. It is funny. Our bodies and minds are funny. And so that joy and playfulness is really important. And then the candidness is the ability to be close and tender, because things can be challenging, things can be hard, and our body minds can be difficult. And, you know, we're proud of who we are, of course we are, but also we have to come together and have those candid moments and candid conversations and not be afraid to be honest about what we're going through and what we've been through, and how perhaps systems might treat us, or even individuals sometimes, you know, when you experience ableism from an individual. Those three words kind of sum up my personal approach to mental health as an artist and as an activist as well.
Yeah. And I think that's so true about around that whole thing about that our brains do kind of play games as well, and but it also, there is some fun stuff around at the same time. And I mean, I have depression. I'm on medication for it, and I have had situations with my doctor that we can go into later, but I think it is hard also for doctors and stuff to actually recognise what's actually a learning disability and what's actually mental health as well, and how that's there seems to be a confusion. Do you feel that, James, as well?
That's a really, really good question, because I don't think I would, for myself, use the term learning disabled. However, I would use the term neurodiverse. And I think this is a big Venn diagram, things where there's intersection between all these things anyway. So somebody told me something really, a statistic that's really interesting, that over 50% of people who are in mental health hospitals also have some form of autism diagnosis. And I'm like, yo, that's really shocking. Clearly there are forms of structural ableism that mean that a lot of autistic people and neurodiverse people are also then struggling with their mental health. So like how systems are designed to exclude learning disabled and neurodiverse people. But I think like when the world is not designed for you, of course that's going to impact how you feel about yourself. Of course that's you're going to experience anxiety, or you're going to feel low self-esteem or low mood, or that might evolve into complex traumatic things, or hearing voices or seeing things. Like, it doesn't surprise me. It makes me sad that so many neurodiverse and learning disabled people also have that intersection with mental health. But then equally, I think there's also some people that don't have that intersection as well. It's like it's always infinitely complex, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of like how you talk to doctors, so you define as a learning disabled person?
Yeah, I've got learning disabilities and cerebral palsy. That's how I define myself.
So when you're talking to doctors, medical staff, is it hard for them to understand that you might be learning disabled and also have mental health struggles?
I had one situation. I don't mind getting into this now. At the time, I was having suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
I went into my doctor's surgery and I was told, well, you don't have much to live for anyway.
No, dude.
Yep, that's what a doctor said to me once. So,
I'm really sorry. Like, just to acknowledge that's really messed up. I know you live with this stuff and you cope, but it's also just really like that's really messed up, and I'm really sorry that happened.
but at the time I just had to laugh about it as well, because I was like, this is even more messed up than my own head.
But do you know what I mean? This is like it's like a really messed up Channel 4 comedy. Like, so I used to have this idea about making a really messed up like Channel 4 type comedy where it's like all the shit that doctors say to people. And then you take it to Channel 4 and they go, oh, it's too extreme, it's too fun. It's like, this is just reality of what we're being told. Like,
Yeah, and it's great because I now do role play for clinical psychology students as well. So it's kind of like, and that's a really interesting time for me, because I'm like, it's like me getting my own therapy when I'm doing it, and it's kind of like that's interesting, and I'm hoping that it's going to help the system change.
well, also it's a really nice gift for you to give to like that form of activism where we're using our own experiences as tools to educate, people that exist within an ableist structure. That's incredible to do that work.
You have done a show, and you said about the system not being made by us. So I'm really interested about Mad Love, a designer asylum. I'm really interested about that project and how that came about, and like what major things came out of that project.
I like to call it a process rather than a project, really, because I don't think it has like. Maybe if I talk about it, that'd be clear why I want to make that distinction. I was in hospital. I was in a mental health hospital, and a friend visited me, and she'd never been in a mental health hospital before, and she was like, "Dude, like this place is rank." And I jokingly said, as in the situation where you make a joke, I was like, "Yeah. Like, I literally could design something better than this in like 5 minutes." And then I start doing okay. I'm a bit safer, whatever, and I'm at home, and I see that person again, maybe a few months later, and she's like, "You remember that thing that you said to me about like the state of the hospital and how you could do something better?" I'm like, "Not really. I was on quite a lot of drugs at the time." But she's like, "Well, you did say that," and she's like, "It's really stuck with me about like that, and like how you said you could make a better hospital." And I was like, "That kind of sounds like the kind of joke I would make." And she's like, "Well, why don't you do that?" And I was like, "Yeah, you're probably right." And that kind of throwaway comment, it sat with me about like, actually nothing about us without us is for us. Like, we are the experts in our own experiences. Why aren't people that struggle with their mental health designing our own care environments. And I think that, that also fits with some politics that I have around mental health struggles not being a bad thing. They are a natural response to things that happen in our life. So I'm going to use the term madness because that's a term that I like to use. I appreciate that's not for everyone, but like that madness is not a bad thing, and it's something that we might all go through in life. So if we're going to have those experiences in life, like madness has always been with us and will always be with us, why punish people? Why not allow people to experience that? And is it possible to experience that in a more kind and caring and gentle way? And then what kind of environments do we want to be in to experience that? Like that, for me, kind of seems obvious, right? So then, like, how do we do that? What's that like? And so I can't figure that out. I have to talk to lots of other people. So that process began with a little R&D grant from our good friends at Unlimited, and then that enabled me to go and speak to lots of people. And then that kind of initial conversations, like people were just really drawn to having those conversations and thinking about that. And we came up with a kind of process where we could hold people in that kind of conversation. So asking questions around the senses. So what does good mental health sound like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does good mental health taste like? What's it like to touch? So we're really getting into a kind of sensory design response, because I think for me, like, I can be quite sound sensitive. So I think like smell can be really evocative around design and textures and things. So kind of creating a really expansive palette around that, and then working with other mad artists like Hannah Hull, and just going out and speaking to lots of people and in lots of different contexts over like a 5-year period, really. So I think we've spoken to over 700 people internationally, asking them very simple questions and kind of collating all those responses. And then thinking about how that can become real. So whether that's doing that in an art space by like making proposals like installations or architectural models, or telling the stories of what we've heard, or equally, we've been really privileged to contribute towards making NHS wards and things in hospitals. So actually impacting on a real level, how the NHS is designing wards. So we've supported architects designing a children's mental health ward in Edinburgh. I was able to contribute to the architectural brief for the children's mental health ward at Great Ormond Street, design features for high security mental health hospitals, and also just done a lot of like presenting within kind of, there's a whole industry around the design of mental health hospitals. So trying to influence that by presenting the research there as well, and getting people to think about how they approach the design of those environments in more tender and holistic ways. So I think one of the important things as an artist is to have really bold, like totally utopian, unrealistic ideas, right? Because that's one of the things about art, is it is that space where you can have big dreams and big fantasies, and like it says on the website, this isn't the lunatics taking over the asylum. It's more radical than that. We're proposing that we design, build and run the asylums. It's a silly way to frame it, like we're being playful with the language and stuff, but actually disabled people should be running disabled services. Government departments like the DWP and all these departments should have disabled people at the centre of them. The healthcare system should have people impacted by their conditions. Like cancer services should be run by people, who are and have survived cancer. Like it's blatantly obvious that that's important. Like, and what's really fascinating for me is when I talk about that as a model, people go like, yeah, and I'm like, but if we apply that to other marginalized and oppressed communities, you would never disagree with that. You'd never say that Black people shouldn't be like leading Black artists organizations. But when it comes to mental health, and I'm like, mad people should be running mad spaces, people are like, oh, no, James, that's like fucking wild. And I'm like, is it though? Or are you like, is your own internalized ableism labeling me as I'm a stupid person rather than a mad person? Because like you, I'm
Yeah.
smart. Like I
Yeah.
know stuff.
Yeah. And the whole point is that why shouldn't, even if it's just like we do so many pilot schemes, so why not do that as a pilot scheme and see if it does work? Because so many times that you see these pilot schemes and you're like, yeah, that's not going to work, and then you find out it does work, and you're like, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think like Mind the Gap is a really good example of that. And I think like everybody's disability is different, right? But our conditions fluctuate. And some days I'm like super high functioning. I can send like 50 emails in a day. I would never do that to anybody, but you know what I mean?
I know
Like
what you mean.
I can get stuff done. And other days I'm like, well, I can't even read an email today. And I'm like, I'm going for a walk with my dog on the beach, and I'm like gonna reprioritize myself. It's not just about like quote unquote mad leadership. It's also about processes that are different, and they know like that. Yeah, we can run our own spaces, and we do that with our allies, with our non-mad allies, and all that kind of stuff. But that means that we have to really slowly, carefully, sustainably invest in what those processes might be like, so that we're not harming people on the way, we're not burning people out on the way, we're not like so. But that's also really exciting because that's like a whole new different way of working. That's like it's fascinating. And actually, like when I talk about my access requirements, most non-disabled people say like, I want a paid rest day. I get exhausted too. Like I find Euston Station really triggering.
Yeah. That is so true, though. I mean, I had the same situation when I was doing a show in Leeds, and like we were working with disabled people, and we showed them access riders, and people were just like, "We're in the same situation. We need this." And it's like, yes, but why isn't it being rolled out as much and stuff? And people just don't know about it. And if you don't know about something, then you're not going to be able to get that process in place. So I want to go on to a project that I think it was recently done. That's 2.8 million minds with young people in London. Is that correct?
In as they would say, in that there London.
In that day, London. Love it. Love it.
People from Bradford would say. 2.8 million minds was a project I did with Chisenhale Gallery, with Seth from Chisenhale. Seth's an amazing curator and producer. Bernie Grant's Art Centre in Tottenham, which is like a world-class black art centre, and Whitechapel Art Gallery, which is like one of the big London galleries. And it was commissioned by the Greater London Authority, by the Mayor's office, and they really wanted to know about, it was kind of like a research project really to understand like how art can be beneficial for young people's mental health. Young people's struggles with mental health are massively increasing. Like lockdown specifically like accelerated that, like the impacts of COVID and lockdown on young people has been really profound. I'm not, just to be really clear, I'm not saying that lockdown wasn't important. Like I'm not a COVID denier or anything, but there were other impacts of that, obviously, and I think young people were not considered in that process, and young people's mental health were not considered in that process. But yeah, so like Claire Lovett from the GLA, who was lead on that, kind of really smartly took a bit of a risk, because when they asked me to apply, and I put this little consortium together with Becky, my producer, of arts organisations, the ones I've just mentioned, and my approach to it was like, GLA, it's like, it's the government, it's these big organisations, like, are they really going to be that radical? And I think Becky was like, well, you tell them what you want to do and let's just see what happens. And I was like, well, we have to respect young people's knowledge. Like disabled people, young people also have really good experience and knowledge, and like we have to respect that. And So I was like, what happens if we try to centre young people's knowledge and experience to come up with models or practice or approaches or processes or making art that can imagine the kind of support that they might want around art and mental health. That research period has finished now, but we commissioned like a lot of people to like work with a lot of young people, and really to ask those young people like, what kind of art do you want to make? How do you want to be held in those processes? And that led to us making a manifesto that we presented at the Houses of Parliament and also at Liberty Festival. And then also like last year we did another process, just kind of trying to bed in some of that knowledge, which led to a sharing that we did, a little kind of work in progress sharing at Whitechapel Art Gallery. So yeah, it's been like a really like intense, wild journey, and at the same time as doing that in London, I've also been running a parallel project in Manchester as well, under a different name, but like just trying to understand how we can support young people to make art around their mental health, really, and what's important to them, and how do you do that? Because I think there's a lot of knowledge around like art therapy, but in terms of like getting 30 young people from Tower Hamlets that might not have any artistic training to make something for Whitechapel Gallery, which is this big prestigious gallery, like very kind of like critically important institution, is a different thing. So how do we support those young people to do that? What did they want to do on that process? So yeah, we're just kind of beginning to think about how we merge all that together into a thing, into kind of like a national approach to like young people, and just kind of touch on what young people were saying. Like, I think firstly, young people are really angry. Like, they feel really let down. They're really angry with adults. Like, they're really angry with adults. They're like, you know, we're not getting the support we need. Like, you've gone out there into the world and said like, it's time to talk. Like, that's the message, and it's like, and then they're like, yeah, to who? What, a 2-year waiting list? Are you for real, guys? Like, and then you don't give us the support we need. You don't do early intervention, and then things get really bad for us, and then you section us. We get taken into mental health hospitals. We're drugged against our will. So they're angry with the education system. You know, they're angry with government for not providing funding. They're angry with my generation for climate change, rightly so. So that anger is really valid. So part of the process that we really discovered is about creating space where they can be angry and they can make art about that, and that rage is valid, and they're allowed to feel that, and we have to hold that for them. But they also want to be in spaces that validate their experiences, so they can be with other young people and they can talk about what they've been through, and they can write about that. You know, they can do illustrations, whatever like material they want to make, where they can say like, I've been through some shit, and they can be with other young people and say like, I see you, I hear you, I've also been through that, and I validate you, and you're not a bad person. Like, so like one of the really beautiful things we did, it wasn't on 2.8, it was in the Manchester process on the Barmy Army project. One of the things that just came up in the room was like young people saying to each other like, oh, you're not the problem. And that became a bit of a slogan for that project, where we did a march through Manchester city centre. We had 150 young people shouting, we are not the problem. And it was just really beautiful just to see all these young people that when I met them, getting them out their bedrooms was hard. Getting them into a room at Contact Theatre was hard because they were socially anxious. They were like just dealing with so much stuff. And then to see all these young people shouting, we are not the problem, it was like, yo, it was so beautiful. I think one of the difficulties is actually adults, the health service, the education system. Young people deserve an apology. Like, and I think like in any kind of restorative process, in any process of healing together, we have messed up these young people's lives. I'm 43, my generation and above, we have messed up. And I think like if I went to hospital for surgery and they messed that up, I would get an apology from the NHS. Like when I went through CAMS as a young person and I went through adult services, I've experienced some real shit. And I'm like, just say sorry. If we have to heal together, which we do, we always have to, like, there's no point healing in isolation. Healing together is really important. Just say sorry. And then I can go like, thanks for the apology. I needed to hear that, right. And I think I can find myself in these meetings with like really senior people in the NHS. And I'm like, dude, can you guys say sorry to some young people? And they'll go like, we hear what you're saying, James. And I'm like, it's not about hearing what I'm saying. It's about like
doing it.
You need to walk the walk here, guys. Like, and I find that difficult because I'm also like, I need an apology too, because I've been really hurt in this process as well. So I feel like in a way we're still, I think a lot of young people, and I think that the journey that a lot of mental health disabled people and probably learning disabled people, like you hear those horror stories about inpatient care for learning disabled people, we're at the point where like, in terms of that restorative justice approach, like we're at the point where we're calling something out and saying like, we're at the table, we're waiting for the conversation, and we're waiting for change, and we know what change we need, and we know how to imagine that, and we're kind of figuring out how to deliver that. But you can't even come and sit at the table and say sorry to us. Like, nah, mate, that's not good.
No, and it's sad. Like the whole post office scandal that's happened. It's like, are we going to have to do a show or a drama that's going to get our experiences done for these places to actually say sorry? It's like, what? Why does it need to take shows and drama? Art is a powerful thing, but it just says a lot about how we are treated, and it's so wrong. It is so wrong.
What I've been trying to do, I think particularly since lockdown, is support young people to have those spaces to tell their stories. It's really hard because a lot of their stories are really sad. It's big work, right? So, but I feel like my younger self never had that. And I feel like paying that back of saying to like, I spent a year in hospital and no artist ever came in to work with me. And I'm like, that would have been changed my life. So like, I've got to pay that back to other young people to say like, I acknowledge your pain and harm that my generation has caused you. So let's step up and create these spaces where you can make really good art, like world-class art, as good as anybody else, that can be in these, like, it can be at Whitechapel Gallery, it can be at Manchester International Festival, because you deserve to be on these stages as well, because you're amazing. You've got stories that are like fucking incredible, and you can write songs, and like that generation are incredibly talented in terms of how they make art. I'm like, wow, like it's time for us to step aside. So I feel like in a way my job as an artist is about creating the right conditions for young people to make art in a way.
But also that they need to understand what's gone before as well, because if they understand what's gone before, then we can change the system. But if you don't know what's gone before, then we're just in a world where they're going through exactly what we've gone through in our experiences in life, and they think they're starting something completely new. So it's learning that system
It's a really, really good point, and it's something we found out. So the project I did in Manchester, the Bar Me On project, so we worked with about 75 young people on that project. It was massive. But about 2/3 of the way through, me and the other facilitators on that process, we were like, it dawned on us that the young people, when we used the term disabled, they didn't know what we meant. And actually what we started, like, we were having these, like, we were meeting up every Saturday at Contact Theatre in Manchester. And we were like, actually, one of them said to us, like, we didn't get an education in this. You don't get taught about disability in school, right? You don't get that education. So we were like, Oh, we started doing this thing. So there's one of the facilitators, Tony D. Paul, who's a phenomenal artist. We started doing this thing called Tony D time, where literally every session Tony would do 10 minutes on this is the social model of disability. This is the history of mad activism. Like, there's a whole generation of people that have come before you who've like been fighting on this. This is like different models of disability. This is also a medical model. Like, some of us might not like that, but it is something you need to know about. Like, and this is what disability justice is. This is like a really cutting edge model, and this is what Mad Pride is, and this is like the difference between neurodiversity and mental health and learning disability and how all these things intersect. And Tony D, as a black queer working class person, this is how race and disability intersect. And we'd be in this room with all these young people, and you just see their jaws on the floor, and like, this is amazing. Like, oh, it's not me that is disabled, it's the system that's disabling me. And you'd be like in a room with 14-year-olds, and they'd just be like, this makes so much sense. This is like, it was so beautiful. And it's like, it's so basic.
I totally get where you're coming from there. It's like, I'm like you, I know why it's starting the curriculum, but it's also frustrating at the same time. I want to talk about one of your other projects called For Them Let Be. Oh, I've got to get this
right.
right.
They Let in the Light.
Yeah,
that's all right. I think the title was a mouthful.
It's not the easiest one to get out. I'll say that.
It's a Groucho Marx quote originally. So the quote is, and it's actually like a term that's used in like Mad Pride activism. So the quote is, "Blessed are the cracked, for they let in the light." Which is like, so if something is cracked, light gets into it, and it plays on the idea that as a mad person, you're cracking up, you're broken, but actually that's not a bad thing because you let the light in. So blessed are the cracked, for they let in the light. Yeah.
So that's gone on an international tour.
So there's just been a big show at the Migros Museum, the Migros Museum for Contemporary Art in Zurich. They've just had a big international show on the politics of care. So that was disabled artists from all over the world. Really great show, actually. I was a bit skeptical about it, but then I had some really like big international artists in it. So I felt really privileged to be in there. And before that, it was a piece made for Chisenhall Gallery in London. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, as you have gone to other countries, like, what are their experiences around mental health? And, like, is there anything that Britain could take from other countries around the mental health system?
There's all kinds of just weird stuff all over the world. I think what we're quite good at in the UK as disabled people, we're quite rowdy. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're quite outspoken, and I think that that's quite good. And I notice perhaps being in German-speaking countries or perhaps in Western European countries, that the conversations that MAD and other disabled people are having is quite outspoken, and that's a good thing, and we're quite good at that. And I think partly that's why there's an interest in disabled work from the UK. But equally, the actual healthcare system here is obviously quite poor. So in Germany or Switzerland, the mental health hospitals, in terms of the actual physical environment, are a lot better. But equally, they have an insurance-based healthcare system, so it's not straightforward what quality of care you get, because that depends on what quality of insurance that you have and what type of employer you have. And there's definitely still a hush-hush attitude around mental health, that perhaps some of that stigma here has been broken down, and I think some of those mainstream charities should be credited for that work that they've done on that. But I also think some of the really inspiring work I've seen, I've worked in Indonesia, and some of the mental health care in Indonesia is some of the most violent stuff that you can imagine. and some of the responses to that extreme violence from mental health activists is some of the most profoundly beautiful mental health care you can imagine. So working with Hannah Madness and visiting a project in Indonesia that was run by mad people for mad people, that was rescuing people who were caged because of their mental health, sometimes for very, very long periods, and going on a journey with those people to rehabilitate them. It's just like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's like all my like vibes about like mad spaces run by mad people, and they're like, I go there and they're like, no, they're doing it on a grassroots level. I'm part of a research project at the moment, so I've been connecting with a lot of mental health activists in Ghana, and some of the work that like real grassroots mental health activists are doing there is profoundly beautiful in terms of connecting spirituality and different forms of religion around mental health. And in England, you might be able to go to somebody like your employer or somebody and say, actually, I'm struggling a bit with my mental health. You can go to your GP and do that here, but in some places, like that's not even an option. So how do you disclose your mental health struggles and have those conversations when the stigma is still really strong, and there's the possibility of real social isolation because of that, and listening to how mental health activists and mental health professionals and artists are challenging that and beginning to work through that. I'm like, that's really inspiring. Yeah, so I feel like I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of what is possible in terms of my understanding and knowledge from a global perspective. In terms of being an artist, it's the same as you, right? You have an access rider, right?
Yeah, I have an access rider.
And how often do you have to remind people that you have an access rider?
Well, it's not even reminding them. It's like I have to even read it sometimes. That's the other thing.
Right.
It's like
So
read it once and then put it into your locker. You're like,
that's just the same everywhere. Like constantly reminding people that you are disabled, and like, so do you get lazy about it?
I kind of not. I don't. I sometimes update it, but I'm not like don't update it all the time. But Mind the Gap's been great with me around my mental health. They really support me on when I'm going through a really bad stage, and so does my creative enabler. So I just want to give them a big call out for that, because they do support everyone in the company with their mental health. So.
And do you find that the kind of the process of like that assertion of your disability and your access requirements, because that's tiring, it can get really tiring to do it, and do you find that sometimes you're not on it as much as you should be because it is tiring, and then things slip a little bit? And
Yeah, I have had times with my medication that I just let it go, and because I think I'm okay, and then I don't take it, and then it's like, and the company straight away knows when that happens, and they're really on it with me at the moment just to make sure, and they always have been. I really can't praise the company enough, and I think there's a lot of companies around that do that kind of stuff. But there is one thing I want to ask: as an artist, do you think that after when we were at COVID, there was a lot of arts organisations that had learnt so much around taking time off and all that. But it feels personally to me that we've gone back into our old routines. Do you think that's happened?
I think it's complicated. I don't want to say that we didn't learn anything. I really don't want to say that, because that feels really hopeless. Because I think hybrid ways of working have benefited disabled people. Like, we're sat on Zoom now, do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have to come up to Bradford. I mean, I would have loved to come up to Bradford, because we could have gone Muntards and had a really good curry, right? And I could have seen Evie from Commonwealth and like hung out and stuff. But like, it is also easier to do things on Zoom. I've got friends that are still clinically very vulnerable around COVID. They've been forgotten about. Do you know what I mean? Like 100, like I think about Jess Tom and I'm like, babes, like,
No,
do
no,
you know what I mean?
I
Like,
know,
it's
Jess.
wild.
It's hard.
It's hard. I think like, it's not that things haven't got better. It's that as a society and a culture, we have not come to terms with what actually we went through during lockdown. I think particularly like I made a couple of projects during COVID. One of them was For They Let in the Light. You know, I went into a children's mental health hospital during COVID. So that hospital was also in lockdown, which is like a wild, wild thing to get your head around about, you know, children being locked in their rooms during COVID in a mental health hospital. And I think like we all know that we went through some really distressing stuff, and there was a lot to learn from that. And I think how COVID impacted disabled people and black people and brown people as well and other marginalized communities obviously had a much greater impact. And I think it's just really frightening to begin to think about that. But I also think we kind of have to, because it's like the future is disabled, you know? So we have to somehow come with that tenderness and that candidness, and also be provocative about it, to go like, we need to think about this, guys.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing of that we will all become disabled in our lifetime through one way or another. But when you're younger or when you're middle aged, for instance, you don't think like that because it's a lot harder to think like that in a way.
But also, if you view disability as a bad thing, then you and I might be like, actually being disabled is kind of wicked.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
of course
definitely.
It's hard at times. Of course it's hard at times, but like we have our like learning disabled, neurodiverse mad gifts, and we celebrate that. If we can reposition disability as something to you know, I don't want to say to be proud of, but also there is pride in our survival, and there's pride in our communities, and there's pride in our survival strategies, and there's pride in who we are, and there's pride in how we're changing the world. 100 all day.
There's so much that you're doing that is just great work, and
Oh, thanks, babes.
I really do appreciate you being on the podcast. There was some stuff on your website that really was like, yeah, I mean, when I read it, I was like, whoa, okay, I'm talking to James, and the Met Police have called him dangerous and stuff.
Yeah, they did. The Met Police called me dangerous in the Evening Standard newspaper.
Yeah, what was that all about? And
that was so because I do also have a background as an activist, and as I was quite deeply involved in climate change activism, and we were doing some fairly confrontational things, and I was part of a group of people that were trying to get the E.ON, the German energy giant, to not build a new coal-fired power station, because they wanted to knock an existing one down and rebuild a coal-fired power station. And that's just like, in an age of climate chaos, like, don't build more coal-fired power stations, guys. It's a really dumb idea. So we announced that we were going to shut it down for the day as like a symbolic gesture of like, we don't need this. They put all these massive security fences around it. So me and some other people, we made this video that taught people how to pull the fences down. It was like a badass, like, I think it had like Latigra music underneath it, and it was like footage from all over the world of people pulling down fences and walls. And it was just kind of like this very provocative, like, fuck your borders, like, you know, there's no borders, like, no boundaries, let's just pull the fences down. And it went viral. This was like pre social media, really, but it got a lot of watches. And then somehow the Evening Standard newspaper ran an article about this hate video that I'd made. Hate video shows eco-terrorists how to storm power station. And then they had a comment from the Met Police saying the artist that's made this video is dangerous. And I was like, dude, that is going on my website.
Yeah,
I love that.
That was just like, whoa.
I love that. That was like the best. Forget like 5 stars from the Guardian newspaper. Lynn Gardner, 5 stars. Is like, no. The Met Police dangerous. Don't get any better than that.
Like, there's also like stuff like it says the big issue said disgusting. And,
The big issue did call me disgusting.
And,
but also I have respect for the big issue as well, but it's just a funny quote. I think they did call my art disgusting.
Yeah, I just find it was so interesting, like this whole thing around it, like a pain in the arse, and it's not entertaining. It's like, okay, like a lot of
But I also think there's something important here. Like I know, like I have these like glib quotes, like all the negative quotes on my website, and obviously I'm being playful there. It's like because people always put like I got 5 stars.
Yeah,
and I'm
that's
just
what I
like,
love about it.
But I also think there's something important about for me, and I understand I come at this with a lot of privilege. Like I'm a white man, but it ain't my job as an artist, as an activist, to be popular. I'm not here to make work that this ain't Britain's Got Talent. Like my job is to push things forward and be provocative and to push the envelope forward. And that means sometimes I'm gonna have to say things and do things that people might find uncomfortable. And I'm not doing that to be an asshole. Like I'm doing that because I want progress for disabled people. I want progress on climate change. I want progress for my black and brown friends. So like, it ain't pretty, but shit's got to be said. You know, you have to say things that might make people uncomfortable, but that's better than like an injustice happening.
Well, yeah, and I think that is so important. I mean, it's better than everyone in the parliament saying, yay, yay.
Do you know what I mean? Like, yay, disabled people. And celebrate us, 100 celebrate us, but also like, don't just be like Channel 4 superhero disabled people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
also,
no,
like,
I definitely know.
We're allowed to be angry as well. Do you know what I mean?
We've got a voice and it's everyone's right to use it. And on that note, I feel that is a brilliant way of ending.
On that angry note.
No, I think let's get provocative. Let's get a bit angry, but also younger generation.
With some tenderness as well. Yeah, I think it's that balance of like righteous anger and righteous tenderness at the same time. And
also the younger generation, you are our future, and we're here to support you as well. And just if you do need to chat, and the system is not great, but we are here, and there
are good people out there trying to change that,
and there are some really good systems. Talk to places like Mind and charities like that, Samaritans. If you're ever feeling in trouble or you need some support, please go to them. I don't want anyone to be a statistic. We're all human beings and we all are there to love and support each other. And on that note, I want to say a great big thank you to James for
thanks so much for having me
doing this podcast. The next podcast will be done by Disability Arts Online, and take care everyone, stay safe and be happy.
Thank you for listening. We do hope you've enjoyed this episode of Disability And. Please visit the Disability Arts online website at www.disabilityarts.online for further episodes of Disability And. Next month, we are joined by theatre maker, poet, screenwriter and artistic director of Cry Big Arts, Jamie Hale.